probably mediocre. He ended up in a clerical position, somewhat of a middle class. We have to use the term cautiously, but a clerical position of no distinction. However, his employer, from what we can tell, got caught up in this rebellion at the time. So periodically in Chinese history, you have times where you have good government, and then there are times when the government is not so good. That's only true of China. It doesn't apply anymore. We live times of wise and humane, benevolent government. But at those times, it was an up and down roller coaster. And this particular time, the emperor was, the time involving Han Shan here was quite corrupt. And when corruption came, and it was felt that the emperor had lost the Ming, the mandate of heaven, the sort of the sanction to rule, rebellions would come. And this one of the rebellions that came, his employer, as far as we know, was someone involved in, and therefore Han Shan's life was at risk. So when the repression came on this rebellion, he had to get out of town. And so part of his getting out of town was this unrequited love for the Tao that he always wanted to cultivate, but it came to be sort of, the decision was hurried along by wanting to save his life in the repression that followed this rebellion. Okay, so sometimes the conditions under which we go forth into the way are partly of our own making, and partly there's a little shove happening, and this shove was this rebellion. And so literally, he lived in these mountains, left his wife and kids, lived in these mountains and moved around to let things cool off, to let things cool down. Maybe he had the intention of returning when things cooled down, but he never did. Once he got in the mountains and got the flavor of cultivating the way here, and by the way, this is not like Aspen, okay? He didn't have one of these like A-frame condos with a jacuzzi and a hot tub and, Wi-Fi and this. He was pretty rustic. He was a lot of times just eating what grew around the mountains there, drinking out of the streams, and his dwellings were very, very humble. He was close to a monastery, so he could go back and forth and sometimes get something there. But as often as not, because he was critical of the ecclesiastical authority at that time, he felt was corrupt and pretentious and not sincere. And he's written a number of poems about this, what he would call phony cultivators, who go through the motions, and he thought it's something you should do for real and not just play around with or act. So as a result, he was not always welcomed at the monastery. He was probably tolerated at best. As with all sort of great cultivators, probably, recognition and honor doesn't come until you're dead. This is called posthumous recognition. And often great teachers, great philosophers get posthumous recognition and absolute reprobation or even death, early death when they're alive. Partly this is because they're a little bit ahead of their times and they're not recognized, and partly is because they are recognized and nobody wants to deal with it. So when they're dead and they shut up, then you can, glorify them and deify them, but while they're around and still talking, there's somewhat of a pain. And anyways, he is this way, but fortunately left behind his poems. So we talked about him. Tonight we're going to have a movie. And I thought, well, after Thanksgiving, let's have a movie. I haven't seen the movie. I heard it's really good. If it's really good, I'll tell you who told me it's really good. If it's not so good, I'll take the blame for it. We're gonna run the movie tonight. It's a documentary. But before we start, I wanted to just do a little bit of Han Shan's poetry with you. Now, we have done a couple in the class, remember earlier? Right? So what I'm going to do tonight, I've just chosen a series, and I apologize. I didn't have time to search out the Chinese for this, but I'm hoping you will do that for me. If you take these poems, and of course, they're not a word-for-word translation. As we know, we can't do that. But maybe you could find and then send Locke the file with the matching Chinese, because I think it'd be really interesting to read them in Chinese to get the rhythm and the cadence and possibly even the rhyming of them. These are just translations that I've found. I'm going to go through them a little bit tonight. One, I want to point out that this is basically 800 Common Era. Okay, that's a long time ago. I had basically a hard time understanding my grandmother's grammar and way of talking. She was late Victorian, so she had a way and a manner of talking that was a little bit, to me, old-fashioned. Her grandmother, I couldn't have understood at all. I mean, it's sort of like you read Shakespeare now. You go, what? Thee and thou and, you know, the language. And then you start to read something like Canterbury Tales and go back, and you can't make heads or tails out of read Beowulf in the Old English. It's like, what? So we're talking 800 Common Era, and yet this language that he uses is so direct and relevant today. It's almost as if he could publish right now. So that's one thing I want to point out. The other thing I want to point out is that there was a poet, 20th century poet in America called E.E. Cummings. I don't know if any of you are familiar with his work. E.E. Cummings, New England poet. I like him a lot. He once described in a lecture that the stages of his life consisted of when he was young, well past puberty. His identity, he thought of himself solely as the child of his parents, the son of his parents. He looked at the world through that lens that I am sort of connected to, derived from, in association with, and see reality through this lens of my parents. My identity's that. And then he said as he matured and grew up, his identity was, I'm a poet, I'm a writer. And it shifted from a primary identity to his parents to his identity as, I'm a poet. He self-defined as a poet or a writer. And as he got older in the last stage of his life, he said, no longer was I the son of my parents in primary, no, I wasn't even a poet, I was my poems. He said, I became my poems, and there was no difference between me and my poems. This path, you know, is one that's mirrored in great cultivators who start out identifying with home and family and so forth, or the 5 skandhas of their body and their mind, and gradually go through stages of disentanglement or dismantling of who they are until they find what's called true self. And that true self is inexplicable, it's ineffable, sometimes it's said to be without a self. So true self is the absence of that small or narrow self. And Han Shan, I think, was on that path. And so eventually you start to see he becomes more and more his poems, because this is the only companionship he has. He's there in the mountains, in the elements, and his companionship, his relationship, and he even says this in some of his poems, his friends are the mountains and the fog and the wind and the water and the pine trees. And the changes that are going on there, he's very much at one with that. And so his sense of self now becomes one of this vast expanse of nature. But as you see in his poems, Cold Mountain itself and nature itself are actually not what he's talking about directly. They're more like metaphors for this journey into the depths of his mind and towards his own awakening. And so after a while, his mind becomes one with the Dharma realm. And we'll see this in some of his poems. He becomes, in one way of saying is, he's a person of the way with no mind. I don't know what the Chinese is for this. It might be Ren Dao Wuxian. I don't know if that's the Wuxian Dao Ren. Okay, so this means without mind, meaning the ordinary mind, person of the way. So the one's identity, one's being, is you're a manifestation of the Tao. If you encounter someone like this, it's quite remarkable. They don't have the marks or the characteristics of ordinary consciousness. And when you're in their presence, all you feel is this deep stream of the Tao going way, way back, that they are just indistinguishable from any other Wuxian Dao Ren. And so that's why they say when they have their awakening, I don't get awakened, they just say everything's just thus. They all awaken to this same, and they manifest in the same ways. So this is a little bit where I think Han Shan's going. So what I tried to do with the poems I chose for tonight before the movie was to choose a series that kind of show you a developmental path he may be taking. And these, I do think, also chronologically follow, though we'll find out for sure when you find the Chinese so we can date them. But let's go at the first poem here. Have you seen the blossoms? Is that?
It's there.
Okay. So this is very close to, well, let's read it. Just, I'll narrate. By the way, I'm trying to think, people that aren't here that watch this on whatever screens they have, do they see that? Oh, cool. Okay. Okay, so, have you seen the blossoms among the leaves? Tell me, how long will they stay? Today they tremble before the hand that picks them. Tomorrow they wait someone's garden broom. Wonderful is the bright heart of youth, but with the years it grows old. Is the world not like these flowers? Ruddy faces, how can they last? So very straightforward. Blossoms among the leaves. Quickly, we're going to do some little exegesis here. What are blossoms among the leaves? Don't wait for it. Don't just shout it out. Yeah, the flower is budding. Springtime. But how long will they stay? You know, for example, you can really see outside my house there's a little apple tree, and it got fooled into thinking it was spring a week ago because it was so warm and sunny. And so it got all excited and put out these blooms. And as soon as that rain hit, whoosh, they're all gone again. That's how fast. And he's saying, they tremble before the hand that picks them. They're so delicate that when you pick them, often the flowers, the petals will fall off. Or if you get a rose, and you see after how, and all it takes is the door slamming or a window open, and the petal will fall. Tomorrow, they wait someone's garden broom. Beautiful line. They'll be swept, cleaned away. Now, in comparison, he writes, I'm talking about flowers and gardens. Now let's go, the heart of youth. Wonderful is the bright heart of youth, the vibrancy of being young. But with the years, it grows old. How long will they stay? You see the matching style to his poetry here? Is the world not like these flowers? Ruddy faces. What are ruddy faces? Healthy red. A lot of people wouldn't know the word ruddy, but it's the, when you see the baby when it wakes up from its nap, it's got this really bright red cheeks, ruddy faces. Young people blush easily. Ruddy faces, how can they last? So this is the kind of a first stage that many of the people that cultivate the way have. They start to awaken to the fragility and impermanence of all conditioned things. And it strikes them deeply. This is real. That's real. There's a lot of things that we face are fantasy and pretend, but this is real. So he's kind of asking this question. Now let's look at the second poem. Now he's already gone into the mountains. And he's reflecting a little bit, still in the early stages. 30 years ago, I was born into the world. So this is at 30. You can all reflect, those of you who have reached 30, where you were at 30 and whether you had this kind of reflection. 1,000, 10,000 miles I've roamed, by rivers where the green grass lies thick, beyond the border where the red sands fly. I brewed potions in a vain search for life everlasting. I read books. I sang the songs of history. And today I've come home to Cold Mountain to pillow my head on the stream and wash my ears. Okay? So now you have the first reflection. He's sort of looking at things as they pass away. He then begins what some people call the retreat. And in some traditions, you go on a retreat. But a retreat, from his point of view, is actually a return. So he's going to Cold Mountain not so much as a retreat, but a return to recover something. So he says, 30 years ago I was born into the world. I've walked a lot of miles since then. What are the miles that he's talking about? What would be the miles? Could be time, it could be distance, but it also could be experiences. Okay, I've walked 10,000 by rivers where green grass lies thick, beyond the border where the red sands fly. Again, you see the Chinese use of balance. You have rivers, and then you have sands. So he's basically saying, from the greenest to the deserts, I've traveled all around. I brewed potions in vain search for life everlasting. What's this? Huh? Yeah, everybody knows what this is. These are the elixirs of immortality, right? These were, I suspect it's still probably a quest, not just in China, but all over. We don't do elixirs of immortality now. We do genetic engineering. Botox is, yeah, but Botox is actually a cosmetic to mask the ruddy face passing. There's an actual search here for something that will bring about life eternal. So this quest for eternal youth existed in potions. And what were the potions? Anybody know what these were? They were toxic stuff because they were, a lot of it was with cinnabar. And cinnabar is an ancient form of mercury. Okay? I just had somebody give me some cinnabar. A Chinese person, like, hey man, you really want, this stuff will give you, I mean, we're talking 2012 and there's still people playing with cinnabar trying to become immortal. Right? And at this time it was popular in the imperial throne because emperors wanted to live forever. Because they couldn't, then they had big projects that they would be remembered by. That hasn't changed either. So you just look at the modern version of this, whether it's the health club or the Botox or the constant, vitamins. Now the new one is health food immortality. Like if you just eat the right organic foods, you'll live forever. No, you won't. My father really ate bad food, and he didn't exercise. Okay? He didn't, and he lived to be 90. And I just got word that the one guy I know who's at GTU is a friend. He runs the IT department. Eats really good, works out all the time. He's only 40 years old, and he had a heart attack last week. Okay, so the elixir of immortality is really elusive, and you don't know when you're going to go. I read books, I sang songs, so he did the scholarly thing, and now I've come home to Cold Mountain to pillow my head on the stream and wash my ears. Now, why does he want to wash his ears at Cold Mountain? Why can't he do that at Shanghai or Beijing? And why go all the way to the mountains to wash your ears?
Red dust.
Oh, red dust. What's the red dust? Huh? Yeah, the red sands. What's he getting out of his ears? Yeah, he's actually sort of cleaning up the hard drive, his memory bank of all the tunes and things he's downloaded, all the things that are on the computer, he is then washing his ears. He's talking about it metaphorically, right? This means to get out the polluted sounds and the connections to all worldly dharmas, the sights, the sounds, and so forth. And you know the famous poem about the two sages that were living alone in the mountains, and the emperor was about to die, and he wanted to find someone honest to take over. And of course, he had to go to the deep mountains like Cold Mountain because he heard these two sages were honest and virtuous. And he went to the first one and he said, I'm about to die. Will you take over the throne for me? Right? And that one just put his hands up to his ears and ran away. And he ran to the stream, and he bent his head over the stream, and he was throwing water in his ears like this. Now his buddy, the other sage, was downstream, and he had his goats, and the goats were drinking out of the stream, and he saw the other sage at the top of the stream, and he thought, whoa, we're eccentric, right, but what's he, doing this for? So he goes up and said, what are you doing? He says, I'm washing out my ears. Why are you washing out your ears? To get out the pollution. Well, what pollution? He said, the emperor just came and asked me to take over politics, run the throne. That's a polluting thought. Power corrupts. So I'm washing that out of my ears. So the other sage goes, and he runs away. And he said, why are you running away? He says, I want to get my goats. Why? I don't want them to drink the water that you're washed in your ears. Because they were downstream. Okay, famous story. So this is the second phase. Now let's look at the third poem. Ever since the time when I hid in Cold Mountain, I have kept alive by eating the mountain fruits. From day to day, what is there to trouble me? This, my life follows a destined course. The days and months flow ceaseless as a stream. Over time is brief as a flash struck on a stone. Our time is brief as a flash struck on a stone. Somebody else translates this as the sparks that come off a flint. If heaven and earth shift, let them shift. I shall be sitting happy among the rocks. So you see the phase of development. First is a realization of impermanence. Second, the idea of the return. I can purify myself and get back. Now he's into it. He's got a kind of sanmei, a kind of samadhi developing. And the samadhi that comes from this early stage of jirguan, of stopping and contemplating, brings with it joy and happiness. It brings with it contentment. So the very first stages of meditation are this sense of the filling up of the natural energy and the return to one's roots, which then bring joy and contentment. And he's saying, I am happy just to sit here among the rocks. Now, the next phase of this poem, we may not get to all this tonight, but I just wanted to take you through some of this. He's now reacting to the contrast that happens when you begin to cultivate between this joy that you're feeling, this closeness to your nature, and don't say it as nature in the woods, but your nature, what's called zixing, the intrinsic essential nature. The joy that comes to contentment from that is in marked contrast to how other people are reacting to you. Because if you're really finding joy in that, you're not finding joy in, come on, what? Daily social world. And when you do the social world, what do? Okay, let's look. Yesterday on my block, everybody did social, right? They came with pots and pans of food and everything. And what did they do before social? Bathroom, cosmetics, clothes, looking nice, smelling nice. Okay? Everybody went through this. So when you're in the world, you really dapper yourself up. And you look nice and you smell nice and everything. That's the first phase. Also, your clothes. Right? If you're content to sit there among the rocks, why would you want to go and get another Brooks Brothers suit? Or an evening gown dress? Or jewelry? None of this is going to be of concern to you. In fact, probably you don't even wash your clothes very much. Really, most of the washing of clothes is for look, smell, whatnot, good at work and so forth, right? So, and he's not buying clothes. He's not like doing Black Friday, right? Because he's got just a single clothes, maybe double will keep me, but that's all I need. So now he says, and I'm really happy, and and the best I've been. And so the friends come to visit, and they say, Shanzai, really great to see you. And they go, no, what's wrong with you, man? You're weird. So now read his next poem. When men see me, Han Shan, they all say he's crazy and not much to look at, dressed in rags and hides. Because sometimes if an animal died, he didn't go like Mountain Man and kill animals, but animals died, he would then take the hide, clean it up, and use it to make shoes or a jacket. They don't get what I say. You're there in the woods and you're really contemplating, you're thinking, whoa, almost like it says, when you're not enlightened, 10,000 words are not enough. But when you're enlightened, one word is too much. So he's in that phase, right? Now he's thinking, maybe all day long he just goes, well, the equivalent would be far out. He just goes like, wow. I'm sitting here, I'm watching the sun, the moon trance, and I'm watching the conditioned things flow, and I'm sitting here, my mind's moving, and wow. And so somebody comes and they say, wow. So they don't get what I say. And I don't talk their language. So they don't understand what I say. I don't understand what they're saying. There's no communication. All I can say to those I meet is if you want to know who and what I am, try and make it to Cold Mountain. So now he's saying, it's not that we can't talk. We can talk, but we got to have the same experience. Because what I'm talking is coming from a deep, real experience. And I can't put it into any of the words, but once you have this experience, when I say wow, you'll go, yep, wow. But before that, there's no way to communicate. So this is the first. Notice that he's not put off by the fact that he is rejected socially. He's not like saying, oh, gee, maybe I should go back. What do I need to do? Maybe if I got a nicer robe or washed it more or did my hair up, or prepared speeches when people came. He's not interested in any of that. So his reaction isn't like, I'm really feeling insecure because I don't fit in anymore. His actual feeling is, I feel a little sad that people can't get into what I'm doing, but I'm not going to change. But I'm not going to reject either. I say, I could talk till I was blue in the face and you wouldn't get what I'm feeling. But if you come to Cold Mountain and you do Cold Mountain, you will know for yourself this flavor. Very interesting, positive note. Now, a further one. Now, this is going to the heart of it. He says, talking about food won't make you full, and babbling about clothes won't keep out the cold. A bowl of rice is what fills the belly. It takes a suit of clothing to make you warm. And yet, without stopping to consider this, you complain that Buddha is hard to find. Now, this is strong language. You got to imagine he's up there for a while. Turn your mind around. Turn your mind within. There he is. Why look for him outside? So now he's getting to the essence of every patriarch's central teaching. First of all, that the Buddha is inherent, intrinsic within one's own nature. There is no other Buddha. This is what the sixth patriarch says as well. But it comes through self-cultivation. This awakening to that Buddha comes through. That's why he says, talking about food isn't going to make you full. Babbling about clothes isn't going to keep the cold out. And a bowl of rice is what you need. In the same way, you need to Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, Jali, Dingli, Jirhui, right? This is it. He says, do it. This is the Nike statement. Just do it. Get off your butt, or get on it in this way, and do it. So it's actually ironic, because if you come on the first 45 minutes of class, and somebody says, what are they doing? They're doing it. You're doing it. It looks like you're doing nothing, but you're doing it. So this is the paradox here. Really wonderful. He says, you claim the Buddha's hard to find. If you feel the Buddha's hard to find, I don't get it. Where is the Buddha? First thing he's saying, you're looking in the wrong place. Okay? You're looking in the wrong place. Next thing he's saying is you're not looking with enough focus. So it's two things involved here. So my teacher used to say, when people first start to cultivate, they feel as if the Buddha is right in front of their face. They brought forth this initial resolve, they're hot for it, and they realize it's coming through the transformation of their inner self. But after a while, they have little fallbacks, setbacks. They fall into pulling away. Then they get into the secondary level of maybe chanting the Buddha will come, but it's not really chanting. It's like, where's the Buddha? And the Buddha is now farther away, and Sherpa said it gets to the point where even if you squint, you can hardly see the Buddha anymore. So the distance between you and the Buddha, the distance between that idea of being real or not, has nothing to do with a Buddha coming or going. It has everything to do with whether you're looking in the right place and examining oneself. That's why he says, turn your mind within. Next one. I climbed the road to Coal Mountain, a road that never ends. The valleys are long and strewn with stones. Streams are broad and banked with thick grass. Moss is slippery, though no rain has fallen. Pines sigh, but it isn't the wind. Who can break from the snares of the world and sit with me among the white clouds? What's the essence of this? What's the spirit of this? This is it. It's about difficulty. He doesn't just trawl off to the mountains, sit for an hour by the rocks and say, wow, I'm enlightened. No, because to turn it back, to look within your own mind, to cultivate your own mind to this is tough. It's hard work. Before he gets to the white clouds, which are symbols of purity and unattached, the clouds, you ever watch the clouds float through the sky? There's no place they attach. They're constantly pure and just shifting and going along. Before that, though, he's saying, valleys are long, strewn with stones. This is the sitting. This is the practice. This is the cultivation. This is the bad habits you're changing. I'm never going to get angry again. Ooh, good. Oops. Long valley to go through here. Moss is slippery. meaning sliding back is hard and it's easy to slide back. This goes back to your point. I just came from a session. It was really good. And then I came back out, and all of a sudden, the moss got slippery again. Pines sigh, but it isn't the wind. Who can break from the snares of the world and sit with me among the white clouds? So he's saying this is tough. Even though I'm inviting you to come, this is tough. Okay, I will stop here. The last one, I think, and I didn't get my printout. What's the last one? What's the last line? There's no within and no without. Okay, just look at this briefly, and then we'll cut to the movie. Now, the movie tonight is a documentary that's done by translators of Han Shan's poetry. Different translators of his poetry actually go back to the place where Cold Mountain is and sort of take you on a tour of that. That's as much as I know about it. Let's look at this, though. This one, I think, represents almost his fruition, if you want to use that language. Bright water shimmers like crystal, translucent to the furthest depth. What does that indicate to you? Clarity, qingjing. Translucent to the furthest depth. The water now is complete, the water of the mind is completely clear and cool and transparent. Mind is free of every thought, unmoved by the 10,000 things. Nothing I'm grasping, nothing I'm attached to. Total zidzai. The mind that is nowhere grasping, clinging to nothing. Since it can never be stirred, it always stays thus, like this. His state now is to be thus, unmoving. Ru ru budong. Now I lost it on my printer. Knowing this way, you can see there's no within and no without. So I'm not going to try to explain the last one, except to indicate to you that this is his way of using language to the extreme, almost language that hints at nothing, to point to the realization that he is now within. There's no within and no without. What would that be like? What would that be like? No within and no without. This is buar. This is the non-dual, huh? Right, we can always use words like there's no self, there's no, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? No within and no without. The 10 Dharma realms, look at this verse. The Dharma realm is my body, there's nothing outside. It functions like empty space, everything's within it. Where's this from? Yeah, this is Master Wa's Dharma realm verse. The Dharma realm, the entirety of the universe is my body, there's nothing outside it. My body and my mind and nature are like empty space. Everything's contained within it. Whoa. Now that is not my ordinary day-to-day state. Sometimes in my dreams I get a little glimpse of that. But I can tell you even before I wake up, it evaporates. So if you try to imagine what it'd be like, no within and no without, and what that person would look like. But this is where we're going. But I'm taking you from his first poem, which is the realization that everything is impermanent and passing, to the difficulties, to everything like this, and then finally where he's just sitting there completely at ease. Don't see it as the thing is I need to go to the Sierras or the Rockies. Okay, this is not what it's talking about. It's not talking about going literally to some mountains and hanging out. But it's talking about a cultivation of a state of mind through a series of both detaching from some things, putting some things down, and therefore being able to pick up other things. And as that shifts, what's left is what you find at the end here. So no within and no without, you could describe for some people would be a hell. Right? Uncultivated, this sense of no self is a hell. But cultivated, this is absolute Buddha and awakening. It's really interesting. So this is his poetry. Hopefully, Iwan, you'll find the Chinese, and we can look at that at another time. I think it'd be fun. So let's stop here. Well, if we don't finish the movie tonight, how long is it, do you know? It's a half an hour. You want to watch the movie or watch it next week? It's up to you. See the beginning. You all tell me. I don't care. You want to watch some of it? You want to watch it all? You want to watch it next week? What? How many people need to go? 2. Okay. You mind if we watch it all? Okay, start it up. If people get nervous and it's not good, yes. Oh, okay. You're confirming his state, but you're not confirming it, right? Well, if he's a bodhisattva, right, and you look at the bodhisattvas here, how come when people come they laugh and spit and deride him? Right? They laugh at him, they mock him. Shouldn't they be bowing down to him if he's a bodhisattva? So this is something to think about. What do bodhisattvas look like? No, they look like those stainless glass windows. They're floating on lotuses. They have, right? And they have auras and so forth. But if he's truly a bodhisattva, he didn't advertise himself as such, and very few people recognized him as such. So then we start thinking, well, what is a bodhisattva? And what do they look like? And do they carry ID cards? Okay, let's start. Go back again, back to the silent voice. Still back.
Thousands of bees, grasshoppers leading the way, butterflies. It's like chanting in a shrine hall. Little calf. You know the way to Coal Mountain?
I came once to sit on Cold Mountain and lingered here for 30 years.
Nobody knows his real name. Coal Mountain was his real name. He just showed up one day and started writing poems.
Morning sun pops through the jaws of blue peaks. White clouds are washed in the green pond. Who would have thought I would ever leave the dusty world and come bounding up the southern slope of Coal Mountain?
The path to Han Shan's place is laughable. A path, but no sign of cart or horse. Converging gorges, hard to trace their twists. Jumbled cliffs, unbelievably rugged. 1,000 grasses bend with the dew. A hill of pines hums in the wind. And now I've lost the shortcut home. Body asking shadow, how do you keep up?
Hello. 你好。
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 Well, here we are in China, as you can hear. Land of 1.5 billion people. finding stillness in China is really rare. But monasteries are a good place to begin, you'd think. Han Shan lived here about 1,200 years ago.
They say he was a poor man, a crazy character.
Here we sit, a bunch of poor scholars ravaged by extremes of hunger and cold. Out of work, our only joy is poetry. Scribble, scribble, we wear out our brains. Who will read the works of such men? On that point, you can save your sighs. We could inscribe our poems on biscuits, and homeless dogs wouldn't deign to nibble.
The Buddhists say he was a Buddhist. The Taoists say he was a Taoist. But nobody claimed him while he was alive. He was always poking fun at people, trying to get them to be better.
人生再承蒙，恰是盆中虫。终日行绕绕，不离其盆中。神仙不可比，烦恼既无穷。岁月如流水，须臾作老翁。
Somebody collected his poems after he disappeared. He left about 300 that they were able to collect.
And of course, the great deal of controversy as to whether they all date from the same time or same person.
Well, Lu Qiuyin, a provincial governor, left a text behind that may be real, maybe legendary, may be invented, but it purports to tell of a visit to a person known as Han Shan. He lived alone 70 li west of the Tangxing district of Tiantai at a place called Cold Mountain. He often went down to the Guoqing Temple.
One of the great monasteries of the Tang dynasty, and this is where he most likely spent his winters. He was good friends with an older monk named Feng Gan, or Big Stick, and Pickup, sure duh, who worked in the kitchen and saved leftovers for old Cold Mountain, who may have lived here in the monastery or lived just outside its walls. Nobody knows.
Han Shan would come, walking the long veranda, calling and shouting happily, talking and laughing to himself.
People in the West like Cold Mountain because she was one of the first poets to use colloquial language.
My mother and father left me a good living. I need not envy the fields of other men. Clack, clack goes my wife at her loom. Jabber, jabber goes my son at play. Chin in hand, I listen to the singing birds. Clapping hands, I urge on the swirling petals. Who comes to commend me on my way of life? Well, a woodcutter sometimes passes by.
Westerners of the 60s and 70s hippies, the Back to Earth movement, venerated that sort of figure. And of course, he was discovered by some people who were key elements in that movement. You know, Gary Snyder, Jack Kerouac.
The name that my Zen master gave me are two characters from a Han Shan poem, one that I had translated. And it means literally, listen to the wind. The smell and the feel of the High Sierra backcountry was very much in my mind when I did the translation. It was my last quarter in the East Asian Languages Department at Berkeley. I asked my chief professor, Dr. Chen, are there any Buddhist poets I can work on? And he said, oh, I know just the person for you, Cold Mountain, Han Shan. I moved to an abandoned cabin in Marin County for the spring and shared it with the novelist Jack Kerouac. And of course, you know, Jack being Jack, he loved the idea of Han Shan. And so did many other feckless youth of the time. I can't stand these bird songs. Now I'll go rest in my straw shack. The cherry flowers out, scarlet. The willow shoots up, feathery. Morning sun drives over the blue peaks. I put myself into it deeply while meditating. Oh, that smells like sage. To make it happen in my mind, to smell it and feel it, and to sit with it to the point where I felt I had gotten to where the poet had gone, and then try to write it in my own language. I only translated 24 of them. A far more thorough set of translations are those of Dr. Burton Watson, who did his, as far as I know, after I did mine, and then I read them with great pleasure.
I was living in Japan. The Japanese were beginning to take an interest again in Chinese literature. And I was doing translation and editing work. So I went to a Kyoto bookstore and I bought an old Japanese copy, woodblock printing. 1756 is the date.
Wow.
Han Shan became far more famous in Japan than he was in China.
The Japanese Buddhists took up Han Shan in a way that the Chinese hadn't.
And made into a serious Zen figure.
Have I a body or have I none? Am I who I am or am I not? Pondering these questions, I sit leaning against the cliff while the years go by, till the green grass grows between my feet and the red dust settles on my head. And the men of the world, thinking me dead, come with offerings of wine and fruit to lay by my corpse.
Watch your step. Almost there. When I was living at a monastery in Taiwan, there were more pilgrims behind us. The abbot published an edition of Cold Mountain's poems in Chinese, the whole poems. This is Cold Mountain Cave. It's the butterfly woman. She's still here. So, right in the monastery I moved into, there was Cold Mountain waiting for me, and so I started working on his poems. You hear the bats? There's probably been people living here just like Cold Mountain did. You know, that's the hermit tradition.
He looked like a tramp. His body and face were old and beat, yet in every word he breathed was a meaning, in line with the subtle principles of things, if only you thought of it deeply.
This must be a statue of Cold Mountain. No matter how disreputable you are, when you die, you always get kicked upstairs. They've even, on the backside of the incense burner, they've called this Cold Cliff Temple. So in the local villagers' minds, this is a Buddhist temple.
His hat was made of birch bark. His clothes were ragged and worn out. His shoes were wood. Thus, men who have made it hide their tracks.
And so these are the statues of Cold Mountain, Pickup, and Big Stick. Big Stick was a monk. Pickup lived in a monastery in the kitchen, so both would have probably had their heads shaved. Whereas Cold Mountain lived outside the pale and only visited. So using that, this should be Cold Mountain here.
Sometimes intractable, sometimes agreeable, his nature was happy of itself. But how could a person without wisdom recognize him? That's almost a generic description of a Chinese hermit.
Yes.
Usually they're so refined. If Cold Mountain were here today, he would laugh himself to death. Why? Because Cold Mountain loved to laugh. And no matter how they depicted him, he would have found a way, reason to laugh.
从言我不惧，鸟道绝人迹。听寄何所有？白云报忧时。住此凡几年，屡见春冬意。寄予中鼎家，虚名定无疑。
出生30年，长游千万里，新疆青草河，如塞红尘起。Born 30 years ago, I've traveled countless miles along rivers where the green rushes swayed, to the frontier where the red dust swirled. 炼药空求仙 I've made elixirs and tried to become immortal. 读书间咏诗 I've read the classics and written odes. 今日归Han Shan, and now I've retired to Cold Mountain, 陈流见洗耳, to lie in a stream and wash out my ears.
Great line. Great line. It's been quoted a lot later. That sleep by the creek and purify my ears.
In his own poems, there's clear evidence he had a family, tried to make it in the capital, regrets not being in the capital sometimes, you know, where the action is, working on politics, working as a bureaucrat.
The term boiling red dust is a common trope for the dusty, dirty turmoil and chaos and moral corruption of cities.
So many of the great Chinese poets, they all had a tension, and Han Shan has this as well, between being in the world and being away from the world.
So today I'm back at Cold Mountain would be like, I've given up trying to be a Taoist alchemist. I've gone back to my Buddhist practice, which accepts impermanence and looks at the shortness of life in a different way. That's back at Cold Mountain.
The birds and their chatter overwhelm me with feeling. At times like this, I lie down in my thatched hut.
As the busy Sunday people world recede at Guoxing Temple, cicadas come up to greet us.
Cherries shine with crimson fire. Willows trail their slender boughs. Whoever thought I would leave the dusty world and come bounding up the southern slope of Cold Mountain?
You know, the Chinese character for cicada is a character Zen with a bug next to it. These are Zen bugs.
There's a naked bug at Cold Mountain with a white body and a black head. His hand holds 2 book scrolls, one the way and one its powers, the Tao Te Ching. His shack's got no pots or oven. He goes for a walk with his shirt and pants askew, but he always carries the sword of wisdom. He means to cut down senseless craving.
驱马渡荒城，荒城动客情，高低旧制跌。大小古坟茔，自证孤蓬影。长宁拱木声，所接皆俗古，先时更无名。
We're in Cold Mountain Cave. We're having lunch. It's being prepared for us by a laywoman, who I fondly call the Butterfly Woman, who lives here, has lived here for the last 5 or more years. I know nothing about her. She doesn't speak, nor does she write. But she smiles a lot. And I'm sure if Cold Mountain, in fact, if you visit any hermit in China, this is sort of the reception you generally receive. Nothing but everything they have.
When you find them.
When you find them. Well, here is to Cold Mountain Cave. Cheers. Cheers. And all the pilgrims who have come here.
Men ask the way to Cold Mountain. Cold Mountain, there's no through trail. In summer, ice doesn't melt. The rising sun blurs in swirling fog. How did I make it? My heart's not the same as yours. If your heart was like mine, you'd get it and be right here. Number 22, a four-line poem. On top of Cold Mountain, the lone round moon lights the whole clear cloudless sky. The full moon is the Buddhist symbol for full enlightenment.
From the commentaries are by Buddhist monks, Japanese monks, and they say, well, he couldn't really be unhappy because he's enlightened. Zen doesn't mean being happy all the time. It means being what you are at the time. If you're unhappy, be unhappy. And if you're happy, be happy. But don't cling to it.
I realized that Chen Shixiang had really put me onto a challenge, that he had given me something to really work on. Much more challenging for me than the ordinary Chinese great poet, even though they're very great and they're very, very hard to translate sometimes. This was more personal, because it touched on things I thought I should be trying to do in my own life and in my own practice.
One other thing about Han Shan and who he is and how he struck me immediately. He's very funny.
Do you have the poems of Han Shan in your house? They're better for you than sutra reading. Write them out and paste them on a screen where you can glance them over from time to time.
Once at Cold Mountain, troubles cease. No more tangled, hung up knot. I idly scribble poems on the rock cliff, taking whatever comes like a drifting boat.
I came once to sit on Cold Mountain and lingered here for 30 years. Yesterday I went to see relatives and friends. Over half had gone to the Yellow Spring. Bit by bit, life fades like a guttering lamp, passes on like a river that never rests. This morning I face my lonely shadow, and before I know it, tears come streaming down. Some of these I read when my father died, so we had a little family ceremony of our own. And I read Han Shan.
He wasn't writing for the elite educated classes. He wasn't trying to impress people with his erudition by making all kinds of literary references and allusions like most Chinese poets did of the Tang Dynasty. He wrote to people's hearts, from his heart.
I would say I favor, the Han Shan version of Zen. But some people think Han Shan isn't upbeat or sustainedly upbeat enough. But that's what makes it interesting as poetry.
Well, this has been a great honor for us.
Poets are almost never discovered in their own lifetime. It always takes a good death or a good disappearance.
从这儿出来的，从那边进去，他就是把灯一坏，就灯门开下来了，开下来之后他就进去了。
And people have revered him ever since.
One of the differences between China and Japan, between them, say, and the Occident, is they still enjoy the idea of poet eccentrics. And they can recognize them when they see them. And they won't make a fuss about a person like that when they're alive. But after they're dead, they'll admire them and publish their books and talk about them. But they'll wait till they die.
寒山有裸虫，身白而头黑。手把两卷书，一道江一则。住不安抚照，行不羁衣歌。常辞智慧戒，拟破烦恼贼。
Okay, not bad, huh? So we'll close there tonight. We had the interlude of Han Shan documentary, and next week we'll go back to Han Shan Ching. Advance a little forward. I hope this inspires some of you to write poetry, or certainly to read it again. It's one of the few forms that get beyond the limits of language, in language, if you understand what I mean. So, any announcements? Anything coming up people need to know about?
Tuesday will be the Tians, T and Dama.
Okay, Hung Shir is doing a thing at Tiance this Tuesday. Okay, then we'll do the transference.